Logan's going to kick it off.
Yes, I am going to kick it off right now because we are live.
Oh, wow.
Welcome to Hunter. It's like you've never done this before.
Countdown? Hi, Internet.
I said 10 seconds.
I was probably talking.
Probably. Hunter. Okay, anyways. Well, should I just... Okay, you know what? Should I just go back?
Go over, Mulligan.
Hello everyone and welcome to the stream scene. I am I'm off my I can't. I'm totally off my game right now. Welcome to the stream scene. We're talking about podcasting. Hunter, what's up?
Eris is our third co-host. I'm really excited about today's show because of the wild attention that I've seen drawn to podcasting while everybody is stuck indoors. There's so many people seem hungry to actually jump on the podcasting train. And that's one of the things that I want to talk about, but also all of the factors that are involved, the considerations that feed into how to start, why to start, what to do. Who to start sometimes on occasion. We are fortunately blessed by two fantastic and incredibly knowledgeable and ridiculously beautiful guests, Rob Logan and Katie Peters Plays. Hello, you two. How are y'all doing?
Hello.
Doing good. How are you?
Less flustered than Loca, which I think is a pretty good start. If y'all wouldn't mind introducing yourselves. Tell us who you are, where we can find you, what you do, and why you're here. And I won't say who goes first.
You go, Rob.
I knew that was going to happen. My name is Rob Logan. I am the founder and host of The Geek Generation, which is a pop culture brand that has existed for the past decade now, which is crazy to think about. I also run the Geek Generation Podcast Network, which has several shows on it now. I host 3 of them, one of which I co-host with Katie right there. We have other Twitch streamers that are also producing podcasts for it, like Pumpkinberry, I Am Brandon, Mop Garden, Booster Greg, tons of different people doing all different kinds of content. I think that covers it. That'll do.
Some coverage.
That's awesome. That's good coverage right there. Yeah. Wow.
Katie, what about you?
Hi, I'm Katie Peters Plays. I have been on a lot of podcasts in the last 4 years, but I'm also on a podcast with Rob called Quantum Drive, which you already mentioned. And I've also dabbled myself into some new projects on my own with podcasting, which I'm excited about. But I stream on Twitch. I play sci-fi and horror games and make a fool out of myself a lot, but I have fun. And I think that's the whole point of it. So that's a little bit about me.
That is the point of streaming. Just have fun. Have fun. Mm-hmm. Our first takeaway of the show. I'm in a mood. I'm in a mood. So I always like to start out these types of shows with the basics. And one of our goals with doing the stream scene is we want to provide education for not only people that are just starting out for the first time, but also people that, are podcasters and they want to, hone their games. So, this show might be a little bit more introductory, at least to start, and then, we can get into the meat of it later, or even in another episode if need be. So I'd like to start out by just kind of asking, what is podcasting? Because, it's something a lot of people are considering right now. You hear the word thrown around. What exactly is a podcast?
I think some people don't fully understand the definition. Technically, a podcast is pre-recorded content that is delivered on demand in an episodic format. So a lot of people go on Twitch and say, hey, we're doing a podcast. Well, technically that's not true. You're doing the recording of a podcast live. But the podcast itself has to be in that on-demand format. Generally, it's audio. There was a time when video podcasting was a big thing that's kind of fallen off, and YouTube has kind of taken up that mantle. But yeah, it is generally an audio format.
Gotcha. So, and you said you've been I don't know if you said exactly, but how long have you guys been podcasting in general? Like, when did you guys start your first podcast ever?
I started my first one in 2010, so I'm
wow.
very close to 10 years.
I didn't
on
even know
my
that
main
was a
podcast.
thing back then.
Podcasting started in 2004.
Oh wow.
That was when they first started popping up, and that was before the big syndication came out. But so I got in pretty early on. But then Katie and I started podcasting.
It's been about a year. We've done Quantum Drive together.
This month it'll be a year.
Nice.
This month will be a year.
Happy
but that actually is kind of crazy that we've reached a milestone like that already. But we've I've just been on Rob had me on a lot of his podcasts in the past, and some friends had me on theirs. So I don't know. Overall, I started dabbling in it as a guest, and then I was like, I want to do this now. And so Rob and I chatted about doing this together for a show that we love, and I've really enjoyed the process. Like overall, it's been a really great, I don't know, it's just a fun experience, and you get to create some cool storylines or like discussions, I guess is a better way to put it, with about things that you love, and you can use this medium as a way to do that.
So are your podcasts all offline, or like do you record on a stream? Because I feel like that could be kind of like a cool thing to do, where you do the stream, you get that type of content going, right? You still have the podcast format, and then you can kind of put that out as a podcast for people that want to listen on demand. Do you guys do that at all?
We don't with our show. I have done it in the past with one of my other shows. And there are definitely pros and cons to doing both. Like you said, you're hitting two platforms at the same time. So why not maximize like that reach if you can? Yeah. Statistically, only 10% of podcasters record live from what I've seen. But the biggest pro obviously is hitting the different places. If you are looking for content to add to an episode that you're doing or a podcast that you're doing, your chat can help provide you with content. So like the first time Katie and I did a podcast together was for one of my other shows, and I interviewed her on stream, and it was actually helpful to get some feedback from the chat and throw in some of their questions as well. So that's a good use for it. We've never done our podcast online because it is, I don't know, it's just a different format and type. We talk about a TV show. So like we're going into heavy spoilers and everything, and if someone hasn't seen the show, then we're just spoiling the show for them, and it doesn't lend itself as much to that. But I've also had I've had guests on that I know would not want to be live. Like I've podcasts, one particular episode that I've been sitting on for a month because it was an interview with a game dev to promote a Kickstarter. And I have not been allowed to launch that one yet because the Kickstarter got delayed. Gotcha. So there are certain things that you just can't do live.
I guess one of the things that comes up there too. I'm sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I think it depends on the topic you're doing too. Sometimes it lends itself well to doing live, and sometimes it's better to do it off. And also, if you do it off screen, you can give yourself a little more leeway if you make errors to correct those errors.
That's
or we do.
Yeah, and boy, do we do that. And then you can kind of, I don't know, smooth things out so the final product is a little more streamlined.
So I'm thinking it probably also depends on the format that you're going for.
Totally.
Where in some cases, you may be having to cut between responses from interviews or playing, audio clips from something else, and running that with the production live would be, you'd have to be like on target if it were going to get played out perfectly.
Yeah.
It seems a lot easier to edit if you're just recording in advance.
Yeah, I was actually wondering about that. Like how much heavy editing is done when you're publishing a podcast?
I am a stickler for post-production personally. On average, depending on the length of the episode, it takes me 3 times that length to edit.
Wow.
Because I as an editor, think about what a listener would be hearing and adjust my podcast accordingly. Anything that's in the podcast that would annoy me, I pull out. So like all the ums, ahs, like all that stuff.
I would just be muted.
And it takes it takes a long time, but I think the final product is worth it. Not everyone's willing to do that, and it's not always necessary, again, depending on your format. If you have like a loose form comedy podcast where people are improvising and stuff, maybe that's not necessary. Maybe taking out things actually hurts the episode.
Yeah,
But
because there's got to be a balance between having it seem natural. Like you don't want it to seem like it's like just like a cut
Mhm.
and paste word scramble thing, right? Like it has to seem like there's a natural conversation. So I can imagine there's some balance between like, having that natural flow versus too much dead or weird, like segments in your podcast, right?
yeah, even just like taking out a moment of pause where sometimes it's good to leave that in for comedic timing, dramatic
Mhm.
effect. But sometimes that pause is just that person thinking and it goes on a little too long and that's dead air and no one wants that.
Yeah. The way that I think of it is like when you're editing a video too, is you're trying to be mindful of whoever's watching or listening their time.
Mhm.
Because I've noticed that when I've recorded things and I've started recently editing things myself, and I'm like, wow, I took a really long beat there. There's no reason for someone to sit there for 3 seconds while there's just nothing happening. So you don't have to take out all of it, but you take out just enough to make it sound like a pause or
Mhm.
something that's more natural and the flow keeps going versus just dead air essentially for a lot of the podcasts, which I know some people don't edit it, but for how I talk, I notice I talk very fast sometimes, and sometimes I take long breaks, and it's good to kind of create a flow with that and work with what you got sometimes.
Yeah, no, that makes sense, especially because the only stimulus that someone has is hearing. So, if you have those pauses, it's I feel like it's much more significant versus like when you visually see someone taking a pause. Like if I'm taking a sip of water, which I do every 5 seconds, that you can see them doing, there's a reason, there's an explanation, and you still are getting, stimulated because you're watching something. So I feel like
Mhm.
those pauses are even more important to avoid having be too long during an audio only segment.
Yeah, and there's a nice freedom to having that, like not having the video component and doing it just audio. When you chop up video that way, it is very evident.
Yes.
Yeah.
But when you're
right.
doing it with audio, it's very seamless if you do it properly. So there's something nice about the audio only format, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so when it comes to before anybody's ever started their podcast, how does one go about this seems to be an overwhelming issue. How does one go about discerning what the nature of the podcast is going to be, the scope? Because it feels like a lot of people are just like, I'm entertaining. I'm just going to shotgun approach it and dive into whatever interests me that day.
Mhm.
Yeah, what's like the
Are you spreading it
structure
on
like,
thick?
of a podcast?
Yeah. So content wise, like if you're saying like, well, what am I going to do a podcast about?
Yeah.
If that answer doesn't jump at you right away, maybe you shouldn't be podcasting. Because podcasting is a lot more work than people assume it is. It's not just I'm going to get in front of a microphone, record myself, and throw it out there, and everyone's going to love it. That is not the way it works, especially when there are currently 850,000 active podcasts out there right now.
That's a lot.
FYI, there's a few.
Some competition.
The advice I always give, and I started early, so I've been doing my main podcast for like 10 years now. We talk about geek culture stuff, movies, TV shows, everything. If I went back to the beginning and started over, I wouldn't start that broad. The only reason we have any listeners is because I've been doing it for so long. The podcast that Katie and I do is about the Orville. It's one TV show. People know exactly what they're getting when they come in. And the listenership is almost as much as my primary podcast already because it's a narrow scope. We went after an existing fandom. So there were people waiting there, and we didn't have a lot of competition in the space. There were maybe like 2 or 3 other Orville podcasts out there at the time. And people have eaten it up.
If you narrow that scope, you know exactly what you're up against in terms of competition.
Yeah.
Or however you'd like to phrase it. Who else is out there doing that same
Yeah.
type of content?
You just want creating structure and having something that people can expect every time when they listen as well. If you're just willy-nilly kind of recording, oh, hey, this is my thoughts today, and it's just kind of different every time. That might work for some podcasts, but I know for me, listening, I like having things to expect. Like they're going to do this segment, and then they're going to move into this segment, and then they're going to end it this way. And so I've personally listen to podcasts that have the same structure and the same build every single time.
Yeah.
And we absolutely do that. We start off, we do our intro. Katie does trivia. I have a plot summary that I've written all the plot points down in bullet points. We read those as we're discussing the show. That's the bulk of the episode. And then Katie's husband does like a 1-sentence review at the end. That's usually hilarious. and that's the episode. Like, it's that every time, but there's something nice about having that structure there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was going to actually kind of ask about that. And I'm sure between different podcasts, like that's going to differ. Like, what are some examples? Like, do you prepare a script? Like, do you have different segments? Like, is it okay to have it more free flowing? Like, how much prep work is required to plan out an episode?
I think it changes from person to person. And again, how much you're doing. So like for Quantum Drive, it takes me, like, I usually watch the episode, just watch it straight. Then I watch it again while I pause and write down all the plot summary things and my own thoughts. And that takes a couple hours to do that. And then Katie, I know you have to gather trivia and guest stars and all that stuff.
Yeah, I try to do things in a specific order. I'll look up the trivia, so then when I'm watching the episode, I can like look for the things that I hunt for. I do think it does vary from person to person, because maybe I like being prepped just as a person. I like having prep done and feeling like I'm in control of that. But for someone else, that might stress them out and it might ruin a natural flow for them. So I think it does, like Rob said, vary from person to person. And I think your first time recording, you're gonna feel things out, but then you'll eventually figure out what works best for you and what works best for your listeners too.
Yeah, I was gonna suggest that actually, was like, you know, you should. Hunter, did your camera freeze? Yeah, it did. Unless you're deep in thought right now.
I am very deep in thought. I'm also a mime.
Like, am I going crazy? Yes, I lost it. I got distracted by Hunter being frozen. Oh, trying things out. Yeah, try it out. You know, like I feel like there's only so much prep you can do. Eventually, you gotta just put it out there and see what. And by put it out there, that just means like do it. Like, you don't even have to publish it. Like, you can actually record it and get some feedback from friends or something, or even review it yourself before you publish it and refine it. So you kind of have a little bit more flexibility versus, you know, starting your own talk show on Twitch that's live. Like, you have to do that live because you have to see how it all functions. But then you can always like tweak it and refine it as you go.
And never limit yourself to like, oh, this is the format that's gonna work. I have to fine tune this. And the advice I always give people when they're starting a podcast is just do it. However, like, starting it is the hardest thing. Once you have it started, adjust as you're going. I've been doing one of my podcasts for 10 years. I go back to my original episodes. I'm like, ew, this is horrible. Like, what is this? Of course, I've grown as a podcaster over 10 years. Like, it shouldn't be the same as it was then. We've developed new segments. We've dropped segments. I feel like I've gotten a little better as a broadcaster. So there are certain things that we do differently in that regard. But like, just start. Your first episode's probably going to suck. It's okay. Just keep going. It's going to get better. Yeah.
I mean, this is the same advice we give to streamers too, is like, we have worked with people who have wanted to get into streaming, and they spent all this time getting the equipment and structuring everything and making sure their graphics are good and everything's perfect. And then they've never started streaming. They're like months and thousands of dollars in the hole before even started, and before they even figure out if they like it. Right. So I feel like, you know, there's nothing to lose by just like trying it out and seeing if you like it and getting used to it. Right. Like, there's like with streaming, going back to that, it's like, there's no downside to just starting streaming, hit that start streaming and see what happens, you know?
I think one necessary part of not sucking is getting through the suck in the first place. So you have to accept that's going to be a part and component of any endeavor that you're gonna do.
Yeah.
Yeah, and don't go crazy, like you said, developing all the graphics and everything for stream and never actually streaming. Don't go crazy like making all your music and buying all this expensive equipment. The majority of people that start a podcast, pod fade as they call it, or stop podcasting within 12 to 14 episodes when they realize how hard it is and how much work it is. Not to say that it has to be hard and a ton of work, But there is, like any streamer knows too, there's a lot going on behind the scenes. It's the same thing with podcasting, and some people aren't willing to put that amount of work into it. So do it first. Record it on your phones if you have to. It doesn't matter. Just get something down and see if you even like the process of doing it first.
Yep.
You can always run by what you record. Like with Rob, if I do something, I throw it his way and I'm like, what do you think? And it's nice to get feedback and be open to feedback from people you trust so that you can make adjustments so that your end product looks more like you want it to, versus being like, no, I'm staunchly, it's great, this is going to change the world. If someone says, yeah, I don't, and this part's kind of weird, maybe take that out, just be open to adjusting. And I don't know. I find that I've actually really appreciated even reaching out to your moderators if you're a Twitch streamer or friends in your real life or whatever. Just have somebody listen to it. Your mom. Have your mom listen to it. Let get her feedback. See what she thinks. And if
she says it's bad, definitely don't podcast at all. Because if mom doesn't even like it.
Mom says I can do anything. And she listen to my podcast.
Yes. Then things change.
So let's say, for example, like, are there resources out there that you can maybe get feedback for your podcast or get help for making a podcast?
There are absolutely resources out there. When I started just because I was listening to other podcasts and I was like, that looks fun. I want to do that. But there are podcasts, just like there's streams about streaming. Hey, look at where we are. There are podcasts about podcasting. So I listened to a few of them when I was starting off. One was the Audacity to Podcast, which started off being focused around using Audacity to create your podcast, which the majority of people still use to edit. Free software, by the way. Just go out and do that and record everything. And the other one was the School of Podcasting. Those two gave me kind of all the knowledge I needed to know. I'm kind of tech savvy anyway, but that kind of filled in all the blanks that I was missing at that point.
Awesome.
Yeah, you can also listen to some of the podcasts that you enjoy and see what they do, not to like emulate or copy it, but just kind of get like, oh, this is how the format is. This is what people like. And that's something I have podcasts I like, and I obviously have podcasts that I don't enjoy as much. So you just got to find out what you like, and then you can learn from people who have been successful.
Yeah.
See what they've done.
Yeah, same thing goes with streaming, right? Like, you should be looking at the streams and kind of taking notes, and take ideas and improvise on them, right? Like, that's pretty much what content creation is, just changing ideas and making them into your own, right?
Borrow what you like, leave everything else there, and then try some new stuff on your own too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like that immediately reminded me of Picasso saying something about it taking 2 to 4 years to learn to draw like Da Vinci, I think, but a lifetime to learn how to draw like a child. It was the adaptation that happened afterward, like learning from the masters first and then finding what you want to do and how you want to shape your content after you have an understanding of what mastery looks like through experience, by watching and experiencing other, in this case, podcasts, trying it out yourself, and then moving your own way.
Yeah, that's a good point. So if you want to start doing a podcast, what are some of the tools that you use, like software? Like you said, Audacity, right? Like, so you can record on that. Is there, like you mentioned, like being able to do it on your phone? Are there apps that come to mind that kind of facilitate that?
There are. I've never used them, honestly, so I'm not super knowledgeable about those. I know Anchor is a fairly new one that Spotify allows you to use. And even just using like the voice memo recorder on your phone, like that's something. Yeah. Even if you're having like 2 people in remote places using their phones and voice memo, and I don't know all the tech specs of that, but yeah, whatever works. I use Audacity more than anything, but in my editing flow, I actually use Adobe Audition as well, because there are some tools in there that I like better in the post-production process. But those are like that's it. 2 pieces of software, and you can get away with just doing Audacity. I was doing that for the majority of the time.
So when you have multiple people like communicating, are you using like Discord or Zoom or something to get together?
Katie.
We use Zoom, which I actually really like because yes, it's a audio medium, but when you're recording, it's nice to see the other faces. Like I feel like the conversation flows a little bit better. And also I can take cues from Rob if we're interviewing someone. And that way he can give me cues, I can give him cues, or you can also take cues from your guests too. And I think that it facilitates a better conversation and a better way to record. I feel like the flow is a lot better.
Yeah, if you can get a guest on cam or even your co-host on cam, just all those nonverbal cues make it so much easier to record. I've done plenty of interviews over the phone and you don't get that, and there is kind of something missing from it. Those I record on Skype usually. So like you can purchase a phone number on Skype and attach that to the program. So I'll use that. That way I'm already on my computer and recording it is a lot easier. But when we're doing a guest that can be on Zoom, that is great, not only because we can see them, but also because Zoom allows you to record every audio track of each person in the conversation as a separate audio track.
Oh, nice.
So yeah,
that sounds interesting.
Yeah, so if you're recording in Zoom and you have that feature turned on, then I have my track, Katie has her track, and whoever we're interviewing has a separate track, so I can fine tune their audio separately from us. We also record our audio locally. So like, even though we're on Zoom, I record a track, Katie records a track in Audacity, and then we put them together afterwards. So Katie and I have never met in person, even though we've been podcasting for a year.
That's crazy.
But it sounds like every episode we're in the same room.
Yeah. It makes a big difference with the quality on the other end. And I appreciate Rob does a lot of the back end stuff, and I always appreciate how it sounds. So thanks, Rob.
That's really awesome. And I really like the point about having the video cams, because that's something that you don't really think about as someone who wants to do podcasting. You're like,
I'm only producing the audio for other people to.
Right. Like you don't think like you need a camera, but yeah, it actually would be so helpful to have that. Cause like I 100% agree, like being able to see people and know how they're acting, or kind of get an idea of when they're going to stop, so you don't talk over them too much. That's a super smart tip.
Got a point, like you let in, right? Like if you were just listening to this, you wouldn't have seen what I just did to identify that. I mean, so on the point of guests and other hosts and stuff, what kind of considerations go into that decision for how you want to structure your podcast, whether or not you want to run solo, want to bring on, co-hosts who are consistent, maybe some who swap around, bringing on guests? What thoughts you have to take into account?
I've done 3 podcasts over the years, and they're all different in that format. So the main one I did, The Geek Generation, is myself and a group of my friends, but it's not always the same group. So I'm always having a different pool of people coming on the show as the co-hosts.
It is always a group of different people.
Right. Yeah. So it's like a group of like 5 or 6 other people, but I'm on every episode, and then there's like 1 or 2 of the other 6 possible people that could be on it. That's good in the sense that it's a small group I'm pulling from, and my audience can get familiar with those people, and they'll start to like recognize their voices, and you don't have to like retread that every time. But at the same time, having to figure out which ones every time is difficult. I did another podcast called Random Movie Club, where we discuss one movie on each episode, and that was myself and always a different guest. So my guests would choose the movie, something that was important to them, and then we would discuss it. That can be a booking nightmare. So if you don't want to have to deal with the added time of finding people who will do it, who agree to do it, and then follow through and do it with you, then you can go that route. The nice thing is if they have audiences, they'll share it with their audiences.
Sure.
Same thing with collabing anywhere. The downside being that booking that can be a nightmare. And then Quantum Drive being the third one has been the easiest, because Katie and I have a set recording time. We know when we're recording. We know what to do. Like our audience can get familiar with the 2 of us, and our dynamic can grow from episode 1. So now that we've been doing it a year, we kind of know each other as podcasters, and that has grown over time too. And no booking nightmare.
Yeah.
That's a pleasure.
So is there like a sweet spot to the number of people that should be on a podcast? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, like 5, 6, 7? No,
In my opinion, never more than 4. That's just personal preference.
Yeah, there's a lot to balance then between everybody getting the ability to say something, essentially.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't want to listen to The View in podcast form.
I don't listen at all, so.
Yeah. I would say never more than 4. There's something really, really nice, and I say this all the time, especially to people that I'm having on for interviews. There's something super nice about sitting down with one other person for like an hour with no other distractions. And that's something that kind of goes in the camp of not doing it live. There's something kind of intimate and personal about having that exclusive time with one other person, because how often do we do that anymore?
True.
Yeah. And we record a show about the Orville, which is a sci-fi Star Trek-esque type show. And Rob and I both love that. So we get to bond over a show that we love and get to geek out about it for an hour or more. And yeah, I do agree with Rob. Like, it's nice because you're doing more than just making a podcast. You're making a connection with another person and sharing your time with them, because you do have to budget time for this. And if you make it a priority and it's important to you, that will show in your end product as well.
Yeah, I feel like having 2 people is really nice because you get to, like, the viewers get to see the relationship being built, right? They get to kind of follow the story of 2 people going back and forth, right? It obviously lends to easier conversation. And then having like maybe like a third guest here and there, you know, could to help like spice things up, I think is like a good balance.
I assume if it's like if it's like always the same 4 people, that dynamic is going to suss itself out and be okay. I imagine if you were one host with rotating 3 guests, you're probably going to at least sometimes end up with an awkward dynamic. One person's constantly holding back and waiting for a turn, and everybody else could be, you know, in a very natural flow. That can get strange, I imagine.
It can feel like a weird use of people's time too. Like, I've been a guest on podcasts that have a ton of co-hosts, and sometimes you're like, why am I here? Like, yeah, because there's so many other people talking. It's like, you guys don't really need me here. That's fine. Like, I appreciate it, but you don't really need me.
Without me. It's
yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. I'm very much the type of person who I wait for an opening versus like trying to be like, it's time to hack it. So I'm the type of person that if there is like a bunch of conversation happening and there's not a moment for where I feel I could fit in, I'll definitely not say anything.
I'm usually like that too.
Yeah, I'm kind of a shy person, which I know people are always like, you can't be shy. I'm very shy. And so what's nice about what Rob and I do is that we've been able to, I don't know, we just share the time well. And I feel like that's important, especially doing something like a podcast where talking is the main point of it. So that finding that balance is really important.
Yeah, that's something that me and Hunter have learned just doing this show. You know, like, I do everything and he just doesn't do anything, and we kind of work that out. Like,
good dynamic.
It's a good balance, I think.
As long as you can find your dynamic, that's what's really important. Yeah,
exactly. We stuck on it.
For sure.
I've had to adapt a lot of my like in a group dynamic behavior and the conversational approach being the co-host as opposed to a guest. And it's been really interesting being aware of that over time, trying to make intentional and structured changes.
I've had to do that too, because I have been like the main host of most of the podcasts that I've done. And when I've done interviews in the past, it's always been me and the person I'm interviewing. And having Katie for interviews with me has been a learning process, because we try to balance like how much we're both speaking. And it's funny because like one of the reasons that it's really nice to do it online is like we have a shared Google Doc when we're interviewing someone from the Orville, and we have all of our questions and so, or at least like bullet points, and we'll like highlight something, which is a signal to the other person, like, I would like to ask this next. And then we know to back off and let the other person kind of take the lead. So it's been nice to do something different and learn it in a different way.
I like that it's like a living process.
Yeah.
Like you're
Yeah.
actively doing that in between, and then also learning how to do that over time.
Yeah, that's really smart. We have a question in chat. Salty asks, what standard vocal processing do you suggest for recording audio for a podcast?
What standard vocal processing? I don't even know what that is.
Well, you're not a good podcaster then, and you
I'm
need to
not, no.
leave and get off the show.
I literally just like I record the raw audio straight out of the mic. I don't do anything during it. There are programs like Audition will allow you to put on different filters and different things on the recording stack as you're doing it, but it's recommended not to do that because if you lose something, you can't get it back. But if you record it all straight through, which I like to do, and then I apply things in post, like,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if he's asking about things like noise gates and compression and all that stuff. That would be hard to go into the exact numbers because it's not always the same. And depending on who's on the other end of the conversation, sometimes those things change from episode to episode. So,
and your environment too. You just also don't want to have your
no
noise.
one answer on that.
Yeah, like there's one time Rob and I were trying to record a podcast, and my neighbors decided to do landscaping that day. So
Love it.
even I couldn't put my noise gate up enough we couldn't record. Like
we literally just called it
couldn't.
off that day, and
I was
went to
staring at
another
him like
day.
I'm so frustrated because they're just with a backhoe, like bringing dirt into a backyard. So
No.
so it just does vary from time to time. Maybe if they were further in the distance, I could have pumped the noise gate up and it would have been okay. But yeah, you just have to find what sounds good. Don't put it up too high that you clip and then you've got jumpy audio. So you just gotta find the sweet spot for your voice as well.
Yeah.
What do you do when you have a guest who has terrible audio? Do you just not publish it? Like, what do you do? You ask ahead of time?
Sometimes I'll talk to them, or even I've corrected guests during the recording if I have to, which can be weird if it's like a celebrity or something.
Yeah.
But I've done it. Other times,
Hugh Jackman.
other times though, so I help produce and edit other podcasts on the network as well. So I do all the editing for Mop Garden's podcast, and she asks her guests to record locally too. And the weird thing can be sometimes you don't hear exactly what it's going to sound like. Like when we're talking through Discord or Zoom, it sounds one way. But then when you get the local recording, it picks up all the fine things that the internet stream would not have. So sometimes I'll get very different sounding audio, and there was no way for that person to know that that's what it was going to sound like.
Yeah.
So you just got to do like go to YouTube and look for tutorials like this is way too echoey. I mean, I've purchased plugins and stuff for Audacity that take care of some things like that. Nothing is 100%, but you can always make it as good as possible. The more important thing is the content. Like, yes, audio quality. Everyone worries about audio quality. I do too. I'm a stickler for it. I won't hang in with a podcast that has like really bad audio quality. But the majority of people, over 50% statistically, I looked up lots of things before this.
Love it.
Over 50% of people don't care about your audio quality. They care about the content more. If they can understand what you're saying, that's all they care about. And if the content's good, they'll keep listening.
Yeah. I mean, that it's always that same thing with streaming as well. We talk about quite often. You could have the most perfect rig and setup, but if you have no quality to the content, the best visuals possible aren't going to do anything for your stream. And I assume the same would be true of podcasting. You could have the most buttery and brilliant dulcet tones, which is great, but if nothing comes out of your mouth of value to anybody who would listen, doesn't matter.
So,
what about?
Okay, go ahead.
I was going to ask in terms of like frequency and consistency of
yes, that's a good
publishing
question.
the content itself, like weekly stuff, monthly. Should it be intrinsically based on your own personal schedule, like when you can afford to do it, and how loose does that get for some people to drop off?
There are no rules. That's the other thing. Podcasting is still very much the wild, wild west, kind of like streaming is. There are no set rules, but there are things that will help you. So consistency is important. What that consistency is not as important.
Okay.
So I wouldn't recommend like a monthly podcast unless it is this super finely produced thing that your audience realizes takes a ton of production. Yeah, it takes a month to do. Right. At minimum, I would say every other week, which is what we do with Quantum Drive. For a while, I was doing my main podcast weekly. I went 4 years at one point without missing a Monday. And that was a contract that I kind of made with my audience. So anytime you say what your schedule is, you are making a contract with them. And if you violate that contract, they will let you know. They don't care that you're producing free content for them.
Yeah.
And it's, you get kind of that same streamer guilt too if you miss your deadlines.
Is it worth sacrificing prep in order to maintain that consistency? Like if you have an otherwise busy life and you feel like the content is adequate, but you'd rather put in an extra 3 hours to make it even better, but that 3 hours is going to push it back further where you're not able to be as consistent.
I mean, if you're going like let's say you release every Monday and you go, well, I'm going to bump it to Tuesday this week, they'll be fine. You just like throw out a tweet and like they get a day late. Most people don't care. And tech stuff does happen all the time. There are podcasts that get recorded and someone will be like, this thing didn't record. We just ran into an issue with one of our episodes where Audacity wasn't recording properly. It can be kind of an unstable program at times. And we did like an hour-long episode and it had a bunch of audio dropouts. So, but it was on my end. So like there were mid-sentence things where it just cut out for 2 to 3 seconds. And it happened like 20 different times over the course of the episode. So I went in and I re-recorded those bits where it would be missing. You wouldn't know.
Those parts.
You wouldn't know in the post because I'm very good at mimicking my own voice and inflections and things. But yeah, it's so like things like that can delay. But that leads to another point. Because of the way we do our show and we're recording about something that already exists, we won't have this kind of leniency when season 3 of The Orville starts and we're doing it live with the show as it's coming out. But we record and have a whole bank of stuff. So like that wasn't a problem because we have like 4 episodes we've already recorded. So we're way ahead of the game.
Gotcha.
And I always suggest to people, if you're starting a podcast, record a month's worth of content or like 4 episodes ahead of where you need to be, unless you're doing something that is super like news related and it needs to be
has to be pertinent
of that time. Yeah. If you're doing something where you can record ahead of time, give yourself a buffer. Because we've both run into things where like, oh, we can't do our normal time this week. Something happened, like there's a landscaper outside. Yeah, it could be any number of things and you don't know, and you want to be able to keep that schedule. So have a buffer. And then if the buffer gets like cut down, increase your recording. We've done that a couple of times where we've done like 3 weeks in a row of recording where we normally do every other week just to get that buffer back. So we were always ahead of the game.
Right.
Yeah, it removes a lot of stress too. So that if you do find like we have, like around the holidays, we wanted to take a little extra time off or something, you can do that. And you're not feeling like podcast guilt, I guess is what you would call this. And that's one of the things that is, if you have that buffer built, then you just go, oh, I can give myself this break. And it's kind of nice that we've done that. And we've been able to consistently do that.
Yeah, we never missed a deadline. And our last one that we need to do comes out tomorrow.
So, but you said that, you know, there's going to be, you're going to be caught up to the show and the show is going to start coming out again, right? Like, is it, does it come out like once a week or something, or does it all come out at once?
It will. It will. Okay. It'll be, yeah, it's not a binge show.
Okay. So what is that? How is that going to change for you guys? Are you going to try to do it, you know, like, how soon do you need to get that content out there for people?
That is a good question. That'll be a new experience for me where we're doing a show as it's airing. There's a way we can kind of get an advantage. I have some press contacts from all my years of stuff, and I have access to Hulu screeners and stuff like that. So we might actually be able to get the episodes before they air. Which is a possibility, and it's a possibility. It's not a guarantee. And we've also made some nice connections with people on the Orville staff themselves. They've come on the podcast.
That's awesome.
We've built up a really nice relationship with them, and that's another reason to do something that's kind of very specific. Like, you get to meet the people that are making the thing that you love. That's
so
amazing.
cool.
Yeah.
And once you've met them once, you get to name drop for the rest of your life.
That's right.
Just put
So
that
I
in the
mean,
bucket.
not to like further explain why people should do podcasts, but here's a benefit. Katie and I got invited to the Orville set. We haven't had a chance to go out yet. We're planning on it, and then all of this kind of happened, but they've invited us out to take a tour of the set, which
so
we would have
cool.
never thought.
It's gonna be a great episode too.
Yeah.
No. Someday we'll get out there. We're gonna get out there.
That is awesome. So how did you go about that? You know, I'm sure people are that's the next question is like, did they find you? Did you like where do you even start with trying to make that connection?
We tweeted at them. Like, that's it. And that's kind of the power of podcasting too. I don't know why other mediums don't have the weight that podcasting does, especially when it seems like everybody has a podcast and anyone can start one. But for some reason, people continue to look at podcasters as experts in a given field or give them a little more credibility or clout in what they're doing. I mean, granted, we had a few episodes under our belt at that point. I mean, I have a brand that's been around for 10 years. So you're not going to get big guests right off the bat. I'm still not at like huge guests, but like we're working up to it.
Mm-hmm.
And also like the fandom about the show that we specifically record about is big and very passionate. And Reddit also kind of helped get the word out about our podcast. So
yeah, one of our listeners posted our podcast in the Orville subreddit, and that was our first kind of big explosion audience wise. We just got
is that a real listener? Or was that you with another?
No, it was a real listener, and he still tweets at us all the time.
Yeah,
that's cool.
It's really cool.
That's awesome. So, I guess we haven't really touched on this aspect, the whole publication of the podcast. You know, there's so many different, you got Spotify and iTunes and a bunch of different other obscure ones. What is that like? Like, what's the best platform? Can you do all the platforms?
You can and should do all the platforms you possibly can.
Wide as you can get it.
Wide as you can. Yeah, there's absolutely no reason not to. And there's no restrictions on whereas Twitch is like, oh, you have to stream on here and then it can't go anywhere else for 24 hours. There's no restrictions on podcasting. You can throw it up everywhere at the same time. And you should be on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Apple Podcasts remains kind of the king on the mountain. They are the big platforms. Spotify is catching up though. Even though they've only recently embraced podcasting, any place that has an existing audio base, if like Pandora jumps in it too, we're going to see another huge boom in like podcast listens. And it's only growing. So like there's SoundCloud, there's TuneIn, there's iHeartRadio. Like there's so many places to put it. And if you're smart about it, you can do it all from the same source in a way. Okay. So one of the things that you should know as a podcaster is that you should be in control of your RSS feed at all times. That is something you never want to give up. There are some places that will host for you and they will give you an RSS feed, and that's great. And I use that, like I use a SoundCloud Pro account. The biggest benefit being that there's no limit to how much I can upload a month. And that's why I can do the network. Like if it was something like Libsyn where you pay for how much you upload, Libsyn's great, don't get me wrong. It's one of the original podcast hosts and it's fantastic. But I would have to pay if I exceeded a certain amount of uploads per month. And SoundCloud Pro does not have that restriction. And they give me an RSS feed that has all my shows, and that feed would feed all of the individual listening platforms. However, I don't let SoundCloud do that. I take the MP3 links from SoundCloud and I put them on my website because I want to be in control of my RSS feed.
So since this is, like a podcasting 101, what is RSS? What is the RSS?
Oh, yeah, sure. So an RSS feed is like almost like an episode list. It's the syndication list that whatever platform will generate. It's the code that says this is the title of this episode. This is the link to the audio file for it. This is the artwork that's going to be shown on the podcast. And every time you update or add a new episode, it automatically generates new content on the RSS feed. And that's how all the platforms know that you released a new episode.
Okay. So you just put it on your website, and that, can you just explain
Sure.
that part?
So the simple flow of it, to kind of, the simplest flow to one way to explain it is, I have my website. It's a WordPress website. I use a plugin called PowerPress, and that generates the RSS feed.
Okay.
So the feed that it will give me will just be a simple URL. And when I submit it to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or TuneIn, I use that URL that my plugin generates. And that's where it reads all that new content from.
Gotcha. So then what is the SoundCloud part adding?
So the
what is
SoundCloud part, they're the ones that host the actual file.
Oh.
So if I were to host the actual MP3 files on my website, the bandwidth would be crazy because of all the downloads. But if I'm doing it on SoundCloud, now it's their bandwidth. So I'm paying for them to host the files, and I'm just sharing the information of where that file's coming from.
Interesting.
But I'm in control of that, which is important to do.
That's cool. So does this compare to, because we have dabbled with Anchor. I've heard of Buzzsprout or something.
Yep. There's a lot of different ones. There's Podbean, Buzzsprout.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these are all kind of the same. They're like a podcast management platform, I guess.
They're like hosting platforms. Yeah. Just like you would host your website on a web server or a web host, you would have your podcast on a pod host. You could technically serve it on your website, but if your audience grows to a certain level, especially if you're on a shared server, then they're going to start to complain you're using too much bandwidth. And that's why you want to use a dedicated podcast host.
Okay. Interesting.
I'm getting technical, I know.
No, that's super helpful, because I feel like we're trying to hit all the steps, right? Starting, making, publishing.
Groundwork.
What's next? Yeah. Like I guess marketing, right? Do you make an individual Twitter for it? Do you just leverage your own Twitter? Should you make a separate Twitter?
I think that depends on the show and kind of what the focus is. So I didn't make a separate one for Random Movie Club and Geek Generation. Those are all in the same one. But when we started Quantum Drive, we wanted a separate Twitter for it because we knew that there were people that was so narrow focused that I didn't want to hit those people with all the content they didn't want. They're not going to care about a lot of the other stuff that I'm doing on Geek Generation. So I'll retweet stuff here and there, but for the most part, they're only getting Orville content and stuff that they are actually going to care about.
Yeah, I think if you are doing a podcast where you're the main focus, or it's based around something that you're doing, you could just leverage your own Twitter for that and just post it there. But since ours is kind of niche, it makes sense to have a separate Twitter for it. But if you're just doing a podcast that's somewhat based about Katie and her adventures, I'd just leverage my own.
Yeah, and because your
Twitter
personality would be the draw to that, the same people who are interested in your personality, which is why they watch the stream, follow on Twitter as well, would also be getting benefit by engaging in that particular podcast.
That's the thought process. At least for me, that's what I think makes the most sense.
Yeah, makes sense to me. Yeah.
That makes sense. So as a creator, a lot of us watching are probably Twitch streamers or want to be a streamer, right? Where does podcasting fit in this streamer kind of life? Is it a
great question?
Is it a good thing to have for every streamer, to do some type of podcast, whether it's I don't know, something just for special supporters or something out there? Where does this fit in the puzzle?
So I think Katie and I come from two different places on this, because I was a podcaster before I was a streamer. I've only been streaming for maybe 5 years, but I've been podcasting for almost 10 now. So my whole reason for streaming was I wanted to promote my podcast. That was why I started on Twitch, literally,
right.
Because I learned very early on that physical promotion, handing out things to promote the podcast, just didn't work. There was no conversion. I needed someone who was already at their computer or already on their phone where they could just click a link and go to the podcast, because that's a lot easier. It definitely diversifies your content, which people say all the time, diversify your content, which you should do. Like you said, Loco, if you can stream it live and then put it out there, why not maximize your content to its full potential if it's something that lends itself
if it fits.
to being that, because you don't want to just throw anything out there and then have it be like not reflect well on your brand, I guess. But if it lends itself to that, why not maximize the content? Like I said before, it does kind of change your voice in the industry. Sometimes people see podcasters as experts. It's just a weird perception that's come in, like depending on what they're podcasting about. There's not too many podcasts I've listened to where I'm like, that person's full of it. Like, and if I do, I stop listening. But if I build a relationship with somebody that I'm listening to, even if it's a one-way relationship because I'm just listening to them, I start to trust that person because I feel like I'm getting to know them. And then when they start selling you products, which the conversion rate, if we're talking monetization at all, the advertising conversion rate on podcasts is higher than any other medium right now.
Interesting. Oh man. See, that's gonna be a topic for like our next thing. I feel like
there's some interesting stuff about there, but also it's lastly the passive growth of podcasts. Like if your stuff is evergreen, which our current podcast is, the Orville one, like people could pick up our podcast 10 years from now and those episodes of TV haven't changed. Our podcast is still just as relevant then as it is right now. So that is evergreen content that fuels growth that you don't have to work on anymore, because the show is eventually, I don't want to say it because I don't want it to end. It's eventually going to end, but that's still going to be available and still be there.
Yeah, that is true.
But Katie, you decided to podcast after you were streaming.
Yeah.
So how was that for you?
I think for me, I had been asked to be on a lot of podcasts and I was like, this is kind of fun. But then, I mean, I've been friends with Rob for a while and we had been bouncing around the idea of the Orville podcast. I'm like, do you want to do this? Like, should we actually do this? And it's something I'm passionate about. And so for me, it was more, I guess a passion project is the best way to put it. I do feel like if you're going to do a podcast, you should be passionate about what you're doing and not just do it because you feel like, oh, it's another way that I can make content. I'll just have to figure something out. But if there's something that you're passionate about doing in this medium, do it. Because I do feel like that's why I did this. And I enjoy it more. It's not work for me. It's more of like, hey, this is a fun thing that I get to do with Rob every week versus, oh gosh, I got to go work on this now and I got to pump something out. So I have something out coming out over here. And so.
Right.
Yeah. Aside from the post-production, it never feels like work.
Yeah.
That's good.
And I assume it's like the consideration has to be one of a marathon, one of a long haul. Because I can easily see, like with many things within our industry broadly, if you're looking for an immediate gain, chances of you getting it are real tiny, which means you will quickly get that drop off because you were hoping to have some peak elevation. You're just going to like skyrocket somehow. Invariably doesn't happen. Then you're less interested in pursuing it. Whereas if you have that long-term idea like locked in for how you're going to be running the podcast, it's a little easier to stick with it.
Yeah, we went in with the idea of there's 2 seasons of the show currently. We didn't know if they were going to get picked up for a third. At the time, we were like, we're committing to these 2 seasons. And that's it. If it goes further, cool. If we're done there, we'll reevaluate at that point and see what happens.
So, Katie, you said that you did this out of passion. It doesn't feel like work, but like, has it become, do you feel like it's become a part of you as a content creator? Do you feel like this is something you want to do more of, or is it just still like, it's just like a side thing?
No, for me, I've loved doing this with Rob and the opportunities that it's lended to me now. And also I can connect with other Orville fans, which has been a lot of fun. They'll come by my stream or we'll chat on Twitter, and that's been really fun. I think podcasting I actually really enjoy, and I've started working on some things on my own that will hopefully come out Rob knows. It's like kind of a secret project I'm working on, but it's less secret now. But I'm doing something on my own now, and I'm doing it because I'm having fun with it. And I also think it'll be a really fun thing for my community. And I'm excited for when it does come out, but it's something that I've enjoyed podcasting a lot. It's a fun medium. Like I'm sure somebody might try this just like streaming and go, oh my God, this sucks. Why do people do this? But for me, podcasting, I'm like, this is a cool way to express yourself. I want to dabble in it more. And I think that I have a love for podcasting that I didn't expect. Like you could I know streaming I could have hated, but I really like it. And podcasting could have been the same. But it goes along with like if you try rock climbing, you might love it, you might hate it. So for me, I want to do more of it. That was a really long answer for me to say yes.
No,
I'd like to do more.
Perfect.
All you have to do is infect people with the bug. Like of the like 3 streamers that I've interviewed, they all have their own podcast now. Like I gave them one episode of me interviewing them. They're like, this is great. I want to do this.
That is awesome. So I want to, before we wrap up, I do want to circle back to Twitch with just like an idea. It's completely random, but have you guys thought of, you know, maybe do you implement the podcast into the stream in terms of like maybe you take a break and you play a few minutes of the podcast, or maybe during like the intro you're playing the podcast or something?
Yeah, we've done some things here and there. Katie's done a listening party on her stream at one point where we played a couple episodes to just kind of expose people to it. We've done some things that integrate like the theme of it. So there's an Orville interactive experience, which is a completely fan created game that would blow your mind if you saw it, just knowing that fans out of passion made this. They rebuilt the Orville inside of a digital space where
That's
you can
awesome.
walk around, and and it's still being worked on, but it's absolutely amazing. And we co-stream that. And the podcast listeners came over in droves for that because they were like, oh man, the co-hosts of the podcast we listened to are playing this game together. That was a lot of fun. Sometimes I will use my stream as a radio station. So because I have years of content built up, like my main podcast has over 300 episodes. The other ones are like 30 something at this point. And then the ones that the other content creators are creating, sometimes I'll just leave the stream up 24 hours a day with random episodes playing because people are indecisive and don't want to choose which podcasts. But if I'm not live, why not keep my content going live in some context? Like if people can just pop in and listen, some people like that because it's the background noise of whatever is playing. And I know, Katie, too, you actually streamed with one of the people who works on the Orville.
I did. Lex Kassar, who does senior concept designer for the show. We played Star Citizen together and got lost in a cave for about an hour and a half, but it was so fun. But it was really cool that I got to game with someone from a show that I love. And I think there's ways that you can work in, if you want to use it as a marketing tool, you can your stream. But I find that I just like talking about it. And like, if people are interested, I try to guide them there. I don't really play. I guess I've done the listening parties a couple times. We did play the game together. I have a command that I'm like, hey, Rob's here, listen to our podcast and stuff. Cause I want people to know about it because I love it and I want other people to enjoy it. But yeah, it's pretty cool though. I got to play a game I love, a space game with someone who creates cool things in space on a show that I love.
We were really excited when we connected with him because we had him on the podcast at one point just to talk about the Orville. And then we learned that he was streaming on Twitch, like completely independently of anything we were doing. So that was like extra exciting. And you met him at TwitchCon too, because he was an artist there.
He had a booth there, so I got to actually meet him and make that face-to-face connection, which is really cool. And it's interesting. The avenues podcasting can open up for you. I mean, I never thought we would have the experiences that we have, or being asked to go to the Orville set. I mean, it's
Katie, there's also something on your bookshelf too.
I know. You have to watch the show. But I won a jar of pickles, which was a prop from the show. I can grab it if you want.
It's a significant plot thing from the show. And that's the one that was on screen and it was sent by production.
Really?
Katie, yeah. So that's a significant thing in the show.
Have you eaten any?
No, they explicitly told me several times to not eat any of these. But it's from a very specific point, I guess, pivotal point in the series, and I won this.
And it's signed by the director of that episode as well.
Which is pretty cool.
That's so cool.
I want to get a light for underneath it so it glows and the pickles are highlighted.
Yes.
That is awesome.
So if anything, like if you're on the fence about starting a podcast, the biggest thing that I've gotten out of it, it is harder to monetize, even though like the ad conversion is really good. It is harder to monetize a podcast than most of the other things that I've looked at because there's no built-in monetization for podcasting.
You got to go out and get it, right?
Platforms, there are some platforms starting to do that, and I'd like to see more of it, but it is very difficult to monetize them. But the thing that podcasting has done for me more than any other medium is create opportunities that I would have never suspected I would have had. And that's not just with this podcast. Like I've interviewed, I got to sit down at a comedy club with one of my favorite comedians for an hour and talk with just him on a podcast. I sat down with Tony Horton, the guy who created P90X.
That's awesome.
We sat across the table from each other and chatted for an hour. He's like one of the nicest people I've ever met. And it's things that I've never thought I'd be able to do all came from podcasting.
That is awesome. Wow. All right. Well, we are going to wrap it up here, but I would love for you guys to, first of all, thank you so much for joining us. Shout out your stream, your podcast. We've got the link in there. We'll put the link a few more times. But yeah, let us know who you are and where we can find you. Katie, starting with you.
Hey, hi, I'm Katie Peters Plays. You can catch me on Quantum Drive with Rob. You want to listen to us nerd out for about an hour each episode. And then you can check me out on Twitch. I play sci-fi, horror games, a little bit of everything. I have pickles you can come see in my background if you want. And on Twitter, I'm Play Katie Play. Tweet at me, chat with me. I'd love to have you over in my neck of the woods.
Awesome.
Right.
Yeah, Rob.
I am Rob Logan. You can find me on Twitter at the Rob Logan, because that little bit of extra pretension that the adds is just fun.
I love it. Huge fan of that one.
Or just someone else had the other one, but whatever you got to do. You can find all the podcasts that we do on the Geek Generation Network over at thegeekgeneration.com/network. They're on every single podcast feed that you can find. We have individual feeds for every show, or you can find the Geek Generation Network feed, which has every episode of every show that we do. So you can get them all in one place too, if that's the easiest thing for you as well. And I also stream on Twitch at twitch.tv/thegeekgeneration. And if other people are looking to start podcasts, we're always looking for more shows for the network. So feel free to hit me up and let me know if you're interested.
Oh, buddy.
That is awesome. Hunter, who are you?
It's a good question. Looking for that answer every day. But as of today, I am the Hunter Wild. I'm getting tangled up in my own cords. I'm the Hunter Wild. I stream on my own channel 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday, starting at 11 a.m. Pacific. I think tomorrow I'm going to be kicking off Industries of Titan. I've been drowning in the criminal empire that I am failing to create in Mountain Blade. But you can also find me right here every Monday next to my ridiculously awesome. Look at that one, but it was kind of a two.
That was two.
A little bit. Ridiculously awesome co-host and co-owner of Streamer Square, right here on the stream scene every Monday, starting at 2 p.m. Pacific. And that ridiculously awesome person is Loco. Loco, what about you?
Well, I can be found at twitch.tv/LOWCO. I play games, but I also talk a lot, and I actually am doing more talking these days than gaming. So
sounds like you should have a podcast.
I wouldn't be surprised if that was a thing. But yeah, you can find me over there, and Twitter Loco2525, and also here doing the stream scene. Me and Hunter both co-own Streamer Square together. So if you guys enjoy this content, make sure to follow. We provide a bunch of educational shows every single week here. We usually have a show right after this, Your Brand, Your Business. They are not on today, but we do have 2 awesome shows tomorrow. We have a show about moderation called Behind the Streams, and they are doing a show that is the name. It is going to be about, it's a great show. It's going to be really great. There was a thumbnail here. Yep, they're doing a show. It is hard topics. See?
Is it
so
the one that
hard
I'm
of a
on
topic.
tomorrow?
Yeah, Hunter, what are you doing?
I thought that was Wednesday.
Help me out here, Hunter. You're on the show tomorrow.
Jesus. It's very difficult topics. Only we shortened it because we like, brevity to hard topics. I had no part in naming the show. I'm just gonna be present.
That's at what time?
I don't know.
What did you sign up for?
Tomorrow. I thought it was 2 days from now. Listen, I'm not the one for this.
Is going to be it starts at 4:45 p.m. Eastern time. It's going to be Hunter Wild and McLaffy Taffy talking about some really hard topics. So difficult, we can't even talk about it here.
That's right.
You're going to have to find out tomorrow. Hopefully Hunter shows up. All right,
We'll
that's
see.
going to do it for us. We're going to get out of here. This has been the Stream Scene, and we'll see you guys next week, which we are
Bye,
talking
everybody.
about music, I believe.
Music on Twitch, yeah.
All right, see you next week, guys.
Bye.